Today we're going to be discussing basic biomechanics and also factors that affect force production. Our key term here today is biomechanics, which is the mechanisms through which components interact to create movement, which is exactly what we're doing with our muscles. It's really just simple physics. Remember back when you studied levers in your physics classes? Well, our anatomy is a bunch of levers. Have you ever asked yourself, how is he curling more than me? Maybe you're bigger in stature. It could lie down to the simplicity of biomechanics. Maybe it's a variation in his tendon insertion compared to yours. Tendon insertion is the point at which tendons are attached to bones. Tendons that are attached further away from the joint allow you to be able to lift heavier weights. Although this arrangement does result in a loss of maximum speed, and it can reduce the muscle's force ability during faster movements. These are some terms I want you to be familiar with, and you may already well know. Agonist, which is the muscle most directly involved in bringing about a movement. This is also referred to as the prime mover. The antagonist muscle is a muscle that can slow down or stop the movement, usually on the opposite side. Synergist is a muscle that assists indirectly in the movement. I also want you to know the different types of muscle contractions. A concentric contraction is one in which the muscle shortens. An isometric is when the muscle length is relatively constant, so there's generally no movement, but there is resistance. An eccentric is when the muscle lengthens during the contraction. Also, I want you to be familiar with some major body movements. The sagittal plane slices the body into left and right sections. Can you think of any exercises that happen in the sagittal plane? Bicep curls, front raises. The frontal plane slices the body into front and back sections, such as abduction, adduction, side raises. And the transverse plane slices the body into upper and lower sections. Rotary torso exercises, anything where you're twisting and turning. Some factors affecting muscle force production. Motor unit recruitment. The more stimulation of motor units means there's a greater release of calcium. More calcium means more cross-bridging, and more cross-bridging equals more tension. If you can get that brain stimulated, you will be stronger. Preloading. A preloaded muscle just before a concentric action enhances force production during the next muscle action. Example is, if you're holding dumbbells in your hand, there's already tension on the muscle before you movement. You've got a client, the activity that they do is preloaded. Would you put them on a machine, or would you have them using dumbbells? How specific do you want to get to their activity? Then we have cross-sectional area. So a larger, thicker muscle produces more force. You cut that muscle in half, you measure the diameter, the bigger one is giving you force. And that's why when we look for strength, we're also looking for size. Athletes should increase the cross-sectional area of muscles involved in their specific sport. Have you ever looked at a pitching arm versus their other arm? Bigger, thicker, more force. How about the velocity of shortening? Faster contractions produce a greater force. Maybe another reason in the gym, you see people whistling Dixie through their bicep curls. The faster they go through that movement, the more force they can create. Going down to our cellular level, what about sarcomere and muscle length? A longer muscle produces more force. Eccentric movements can be 120 to 160% more forceful than concentric. Negatives are great to throw in as part of your training program. A pre-stretch. Think plyometrics. Plyometric relies on the concept of the pre-stretch. When you pre-stretch the muscle, you are utilizing elastic energy, or the SCC, which we'll discuss in future chapters. An older muscle, less force. Muscles are stiffer. Muscles may even be smaller. How about muscle fiber type? Do you think there's a type that produces more force? You betcha. Type 2, especially type 2X, is going to be dominating in force capacity versus type 1. One more thing I want to hit in the slideshow is the concept of delayed onset muscle soreness, DOMS. If you haven't heard of DOMS before, I'm guessing you may have at least have experienced it, but may have not known the name. It's skeletal muscle damage after intense activity, and it generally peaks within 24 to 72 hours post-workout. Eccentric muscle actions induce the greatest discomfort from DOMS, and there's a decreased force production if you are experiencing DOMS. Changes that cause DOMS include an increased fluid within the muscle and a disruption at the sarcomere. Now that you know a lot about biomechanics and force production, you're well on your way to developing programs, especially for athletes. If you know how the body moves, you can influence that. You can elicit greater results by your program. Here's some questions you're going to need to know though. What muscles are being used? What type of muscle fibers are recruited? And train those. Is the sport aerobic or anaerobic? Train that way. What is the speed of the muscle action and mimic that when you're training? What type of contraction is the action? What type of movement is occurring? Is the muscle stretched prior to the action? How can I mimic that in the weight room? Is the muscle preloaded prior to the action? There's a lot you can work with to make sure that your program is specifically designed for the biomechanics of the human body and the action it's about to perform. Good luck designing those programs.